When speaking French, before you can say what you're going to do, you need to know how to conjugate verbs. In this video, we will explain how to conjugate verbs in the past and present.
Next up, knowledge!
Let's start off with present tense verbs. There are three types of verbs that we use rules for: ER verbs, IR verbs, and RE verbs. There are also irregular verbs and reflexive verbs, but we'll get back to that later.
We will use manger, or to eat, as our example for ER verbs.
I eat with my friend.
Now, to say that in French, you need to take off the ER and leave the stem of manger, which is M-A-N-G, and add the appropriate ending.
These are the pronouns with their endings. Je mange, tu manges, il, elle, on mange, nous mangeons, vous mangez, and il, elle mange. In this case, since the stem ends in a G, if you want to say we eat, then you have to add an E onto the O and S.
With this information, you can now say
I eat with my friend.
to
Je mange avec mon ami.
ER down, 3 more to go.
Next are IR verbs, and we are using choisir, or to choose, as this example.
You choose blue.
First, you take off the IR, leaving the CHOIS. Just like ER verbs, there's a certain ending to each pronoun, shown here. Je choisis, tu choisis, il, elle, on choisit, nous choisissons, vous choisissez, and il, elle choisissent.
That means that saying you choose blue in French is
Tu choisis le stylo bleu.
Now to the last of the main rules for conjugating. If you want to say
She waits for the bus.
For the present tense of attendre, or to wait, you leave the stem and add on the appropriate ending. In this case, it will be j'attends with an S. Tu attends, il, elle, on attend, nous attendons, vous attendez, and ils, elles attendent.
that means that it is.
Elle attend the bus.
Wow, that wasn't so hard, was it? Now it gets a little more complicated. There are 5 irregular verbs that you need to know. These verbs do not follow a specific pattern, therefore they are irregular.
These are the 5 irregular verbs that you need to know. Avoir, to have. The endings are j'ai, tu as, il, elle, on a, nous avons, vous avez, and il, elle, on. Aller, to go. The endings are je vais, tu vas, il, elle, on va, nous allons, vous allez, and ils, elles vont. Faire, to do. The endings are je fais, tu fais, ils, elles, on fait, nous faisons, vous faites, and ils, elles font. Prendre, to take / get. The endings are je prends, tu prends, ils, elles, on prend, nous prendons, vous prenez, and ils, elles prennent. And être, to be. Je suis, tu es, ils, elles, on est, nous sommes, vous êtes, and ils, elles sont.
Knowing these verbs will come in handy, especially when you get into the past tense. Then there are reflexive verbs, which, in my opinion, are much easier. Reflexive verbs have an additional word to express that you're doing this to yourself.
For reflexive verbs, we are going to use the example of the verb se lever, or to get yourself up. Je me lève, tu te lèves, il, elle, on se lève, nous nous lèvons, vous vous levez, and il, elle se lève. Reflexive verbs are special and need the extra word to show that it is being done to oneself. Me, te, se, nous, vous, and ce are examples of these words.
Now with the knowledge of present tense verb conjugations, past tense will be much easier. Conjugating as the past tense is much easier once you know how to conjugate the verbs être and avoir. Why, you ask? Because these 2 verbs before your other verbs show that you were doing this in the past. We are going to reuse all the sentences used at the beginning of the video. But since that was earlier, we're going to use the past tense verbs that describe them. Remember when this happened?
I eat with my friend.
Now we are going to change it to make it past tense.
First, conjugate the verb avoir and place it after the correlating pronoun.
With the ER verb, take off the ER leaving the stem. For all forms, place an E with an accent aigu, then place the stem with the E and accent aigu after the correlating pronoun in form of the verb avoir. For example, manger, to eat, j'ai mangé, tu as mangé, il, elle, on a mangé, nous avons mangé, vous avez mangé, and ils, elles ont mangé. So now this turns into this.
J'ai mangé avec mon ami.
For IR verbs, you do the same as ER verbs, except take off the IR and leave an I. For example, choisir, to choose, would be choisi. Now for RE verbs. For those, it's also the same as ER verbs, but take off the RE and leave a U. For example, attendre, to wait, would be attendu. Now for irregular verbs. They follow the same rule as the 3 words that came before that use the verb avoir. These do not follow the same pattern though, so the words do not incorporate the stem. Instead, you use the past participle of each verb after the conjugated form of avoir. Avoir would be être would be été, faire would be fait, and prendre would be pris. There are a few verbs that do not go with this. The only exception to this rule is when verbs use être instead of avoir. Now for conjugation of past tense verbs in the passé composé using the verb être. You have to remember that all verbs, and also past participles, that are being conjugated other than the forms of être need to agree with the pronoun. If the pronoun is a female, then add an E to the end of the verb and past participle. If the pronoun is male, then leave it the same. Also, if the pronoun is plural, then add an S to the end to keep it in agreement. Aller, to go. Je suis allé, tu es allé, il, elle, on est allé, nous sommes allés, vous êtes allés, and ils, elles sont allés. Directions for conjugating reflexive verbs in the passé composé. Remember, all reflexive verbs use the verb être. You do the same as in the present tense with reflexive verbs, except instead of actually conjugating the verb, take off the ER and add an E with an accent aigu. Remember, reflexive verbs need to be in agreement with the pronoun, so you may need to add an E at the end if it is female or an S. For example, se lever, which means to get. Je me suis lève, tu te élèves, il, elle, on se élève, nous nous sommes lèves, vous vous êtes lèves, ils, elles se sont lèves. All you need to know is a couple of rules, and the possibilities are endless for all the things you can say in French. Au revoir!